But anyway, it's all over. It's all over. It's done with. Like, you're here now. Like, what do you want?
The shift hits Gino before the coffee even cools, because the smile he practiced on the ride over lands in a room where Natalie already decided forgiveness is off the table and verification runs the show. And the second he senses the questions are coming first and the warmth later, something old and familiar slips away and does not come back. This is not a reunion dressed as romance, this is an audit. And Gino feels the power drain when Natalie sets the pace, chooses the seat, controls the pauses, and lets silence work harder than any accusation ever could. The contradiction sits right there in the air, because if this were about closure, she would have stayed home, and if this were about getting back together, she would have softened the edges, yet she does neither. And that choice tells you more than any speech ever will. Washington, D.C. changes the map. Different streets, different energy, different rules. Michigan felt like his terrain, his routines, his stories, his escape hatches. D.C. places Natalie in command, and Gino senses the switch when his words start to spill faster than his thoughts, when he explains things nobody asked about, when he tries to narrate his own redemption before anyone confirms there is one to narrate. Natalie stays calm, steady, measured, and that calm feels heavier than anger, because anger would mean the door is open for repair, while calm means the door stays closed until the facts line up clean. Viewers expect a second chance scene, hugs, apologies, maybe a reset button, yet Natalie brings something else, a checklist disguised as conversation, and Gino realizes his old tools do not work here. Not charm, not self-pity, not stories about growth that nobody verified yet. The trap snaps quietly. Answers get promised but not delivered, trust gets mentioned but not granted, and the biggest question starts pressing against everything you see next. Because if Natalie is not here to forgive and not here to rush, then why did she show up at all? Rewind and don't soften it, because the collapse did not start at Dana's party. It started the moment Gino tried to run two stories at the same time and assumed the edit would protect him. One story where he is the wounded ex who wants peace, and another story where he is the new guy ready to. Start fresh with Natalie. And the problem is, you cannot build trust on a timeline you keep rewriting every time it gets inconvenient. He chased Natalie with confidence, the kind of confidence people use when they want the other person to relax, to stop asking, to stop checking, and you could hear it in how certain he sounded. Marriage is over, it's done, there is nothing to worry about, come see me, we can finally move forward. And if you are Natalie, you want to believe it, because hope is a strong drug and nobody wants to feel paranoid for wanting basic clarity. Then the receipts start arriving, not as one big explosion, but as little cracks. A meal here, a conversation there, a moment where the camera catches an energy he claimed didn't exist, and you realize the word over was doing a lot of unpaid labor. Gino had been orbiting Jasmine while pitching Natalie a clean slate. And the worst part is not even the mess itself, it's the way he tried to control what Natalie knew so she would take a trip based on his version of reality. Because incomplete truth is still a lie, it is just packaged prettier. Michigan becomes the stage where Natalie shows up expecting certainty and instead gets ambiguity wrapped in reassurance, and you can feel her trying to make it make sense, trying to be fair, trying not to look foolish on television, while the ground under her keeps shifting. This is why the later humiliation hits so hard, because by the time Natalie lands, the outcome is already leaning in one direction, and she is stepping into dynamics she did not create and cannot manage. A couple's unfinished war, an ex who still has access, a man who wants sympathy more than accountability, and a new relationship being asked to survive inside someone else's chaos. Watching it back, the painful realization forms slowly, like cold water creeping up your chest, because Natalie didn't walk into a fresh start. She walked into a story that was already written, and she was only invited in to play the part that made Gino look better. Dana's party does not explode, it exposes. And that difference matters, because nothing cuts deeper than humiliation served quietly, in front of people, with nowhere to hide. There is no dramatic buildup, no warning music, just a room full of witnesses, and a truth that refuses to stay private. And when Jasmine turns her attention toward Natalie, the attack lands not because of volume, but because of certainty. Because Jasmine speaks like someone who knows she still has standing, and Natalie feels it instantly. This is not jealousy spilling over, this is territory being defended, and the cameras do not need to zoom in to show it, because the message is clear in the way the room reacts and in the way Gino does not. Gino freezes, and silence becomes the loudest thing there, because a man who promised closure does not stand between two women when closure is real. He does not hesitate, he does not look confused, and he does not let one woman fight a battle he claims ended long ago. Natalie watches this unfold in real time, not as gossip, not as hindsight, but as lived experience, and you can almost feel the moment where her body story catches up to what her mind has been trying to ignore. Because if she were the priority, this scene would not exist. And if the past were truly over, it would not be this present. The absence of defense is its own confession, and the lack of clarity becomes clarity, sharp and unavoidable. This is where the story breaks open, because Natalie is no longer guessing. She is observing, and what she observes is not a misunderstanding, but a hierarchy, one where she sits below unresolved business and above nobody's comfort. Being attacked hurts, but being left alone while it happens hurts differently. And when Gino finally speaks, the timing gives him away, because late explanations never undo early silence. The aftershock lingers long after the party ends, because once you see where you rank in someone's life under pressure, you cannot convince yourself otherwise later, no matter how gently the apology arrives. After the party, the noise shifts locations, because Gino does not sit with what happened, he circulates it, and the story becomes something he needs to manage rather than something he needs to own. So he tells it to strangers, to cameras, to anyone who will listen, shaping himself into the wounded party who got caught in the middle of other people's chaos. And this is not mystery behavior. It is survival instinct mixed with reputation repair. When people feel exposed, they rush to control the narrative, not to heal, but to stabilize how they are seen. And the fastest way to do that is to speak first, speak often, and frame the pain as something inflicted on them rather than something they helped create. Gino leans into that pattern hard, emphasizing how he felt attacked, how unfair it was, how misunderstood he is, and each retelling trims away his agency until the story barely recognizes him as a decision maker at all. Natalie does the opposite. She disappears. No speeches, no counter-campaign, no attempts to clarify. Space replaces argument, and space becomes power, because silence forces the truth to sit where it belongs instead of bouncing around looking for sympathy. Viewers who expect immediate confrontation miss what is happening here, because stepping back is not avoidance, it is assessment, and Natalie choosing distance signals something deeper than anger. She is no longer negotiating for understanding, she is recalculating whether access is deserved at all. The absence of her voice in this phase speaks louder than Gino's repeated explanations, because when someone keeps explaining themselves to everyone except the person they hurt, it usually means they are more concerned with perception than repair. This is where the emotional math turns strange, because Natalie worked hard to close this door, to absorb embarrassment, to leave a situation that cost her dignity, and yet the question hangs quietly in the background as the story breathes, because if space brought clarity and distance brought strength, then why would anyone choose to step back toward a dynamic that already showed its limit, and what would need to change for reopening that door to make sense at all? The re-entry happens in DC, and everything about the scene signals change before a single serious question lands, because cities carry posture, and this one belongs to Natalie. Not geographically only, but emotionally, and Gino feels it the second he starts talking more than necessary, filling space with nervous laughter, side comments, and explanations nobody requested. Natalie controls the pace, without raising her voice or tightening her jaw, and that calm does not invite comfort, it invites precision, because when someone lets you speak freely while they listen closely, every extra word starts to feel like a mistake. Gino keep going, circling points, clarifying intentions before they are challenged, trying to get ahead of doubts that have not yet been spoken, and the effort gives him away more than any accusation ever could. Natalie asks clean questions and then waits, and waiting does the damage yelling never achieves, because silence forces people to sit inside their own answers, and Gino struggles there, adjusting, backtracking slightly, smoothing edges, laughing at moments that do not call for laughter, and promising growth in a tone that sounds practiced rather than settled. The posture is unmistakable now, because he wants reassurance while she wants information, and those goals pull in opposite directions. Michigan allowed him to frame moments casually, to redirect when things got uncomfortable, but DC removes those escape routes, and Natalie's stillness turns every attempt at charm into noise. What lands hardest is not what Natalie says, but what she does not say, because she does not rush to soothe him, does not rush to confirm interest, and does not reward effort with warmth. And Gino realizes the familiar script is gone. He cannot talk his way back into control, cannot speed past discomfort, cannot shorten the distance with promises alone, and the imbalance shows in his body language as much as his words. Somewhere between another unnecessary explanation and another unanswered pause, viewers feel it clearly, the balance has flipped, and whatever happens next will happen on Natalie's terms, not his. Natalie sets rules without selling romance, no labels, no future talk, honesty first, and the clarity lands heavy, because clarity removes hiding places and turns every pause into pressure. Gino agrees fast, nodding along, promising openness, speed racing ahead of substance, and speed raises questions rather than trust. Growth moves slow, growth leaves room for discomfort, growth accepts scrutiny without rushing toward approval, while fast agreement looks like avoidance dressed as cooperation. Natalie notices the difference, not with accusations, but with stillness, because stillness exposes gaps words rush past. When Natalie says honesty comes before affection, the room tightens, and Gino responds with instant compliance, yes after yes, stacked before proof arrives, and the stack starts wobbling. Agreement without friction feels neat on camera, yet neat answers fail when follow-up arrives, and follow-up always arrives. Natalie refuses labels for a reason. Labels promise safety before safety exists, and safety grows from consistent behavior observed over time rather than declarations. Gino keeps offering declarations, shorter now, softer now, hoping momentum replaces verification, while Natalie slows the tempo again. Pressure grows as clarity holds firm, because clarity demands alignment between past choices and present claims, and alignment requires patience. Gino wants relief, Natalie wants evidence, and those wants collide. Fast agreement turns into a mirror, showing fear of losing access rather than confidence earned through change. Control shows through restraint, and Natalie practices restraint with intent, letting questions hang and watching responses mature or crack. Each nod from Gino arrives early, before weight settles, and early nods signal urgency rather than readiness. Viewers sense stakes rising, since honesty first means consequences first, and consequences remove comfort. Natalie holds ground, steady and unswayed, and the steadiness sharpens every exchange. Doubt lingers in the air, not as drama but as gravity, pulling every word downward, asking whether patience wins or impatience repeats history. Gino talks about growth like someone reciting a checklist, calmer tone, fewer interruptions, better listening, yet the behavior under the surface tells a tighter story, because he avoids saying Jasmine's name as if the name itself might summon consequences he is not ready to face. Viewers catch this instinctively, because avoidance is not accountability. It is containment, and containment only works until pressure finds the seam. He measures progress by restraint, by what he does not say, by how carefully he edits himself, and restraint feels like change until you realize nothing underneath has been tested yet. Natalie notices the pattern without reacting to it, and that restraint on her side becomes the real test, because she is not looking for a polished performance. She is watching how he navigates discomfort without shortcuts. Each time Gino steers away from specifics, each time he generalizes instead of naming the problem cleanly, the gap widens, because accountability has weight and names have weight, and refusing to carry them signals fear more than maturity. Natalie lets him speak, and the more he speaks, the more the omissions stand out. Not loud, not dramatic, just present. He wants credit for restraint, yet restraint without confrontation delays resolution, and delayed resolution keeps old dynamics alive. Growth would mean risking the uncomfortable sentence, risking loss of access, risking honesty without knowing the outcome, and Gino is not there yet. Natalie's gaze stays steady, not judgmental, not warm, observant, and observation shifts the room, because once someone feels watched for consistency rather than charm, habits surface fast. She asks fewer questions now, not because curiosity faded, but because answers arrive without prompt when pressure holds. The space fills with quiet check, pauses that last a beat longer, reactions measured instead of rushed, and Gino adjusts again, sensing something new. This is no longer a date or a reunion, this is monitoring. And when Natalie leans back slightly and lets the silence stretch, the message lands without being spoken. The evaluation has started, and every move from here forward counts. Motives slide into focus once the noise drops, because when two people meet again after public fallout, curiosity turns inward, and viewers start asking harder questions, not about who was right, but about why this meeting exists at all. Airtime sits on the table whether anyone admits it or not, because cameras change incentives, and exposure brings relevance. Relevance brings opportunity, and opportunity feels tempting when identity has been shaken. Jewelry flashes briefly and reminds everyone this franchise trades in symbols as much as feelings, while loneliness hums underneath everything, quieter but persistent, pushing people toward familiar chaos instead of unfamiliar peace. None of this makes anyone a villain, and refusing to crown one matters, because reducing complex choices to good and bad misses the real tension, which lives in mixed motives colliding at the worst moments. Natalie gains something by showing up, control over the narrative, a chance to rewrite her exit on her own terms, and prove to herself she can face discomfort without shrinking. Yet the risk cuts just as deep. Reopening contact risks reopening wounds, confusing boundaries, and inviting the same patterns back through a door she worked hard to close. Gino gains access, visibility, and the chance to repair his image, but risks exposure of gaps between what he claims and what he practices, because monitoring replaces assumption the moment Natalie stops filling silence for him. Fair counterpoints matter here, because people do revisit past connections for reasons that are not shallow, closure, clarity, unfinished questions, and dismissing those reasons flattens the story. The tension sharpens when honesty shifts from a talking point to a cop, because honesty without consequence is easy, and honesty that threatens comfort tests character. So far, Gino has agreed quickly, promised openly, and avoided friction, but the real test waits ahead. In the moment, honesty asks for sacrifice rather than applause. Natalie knows this, viewers sense it, and the air tightens with anticipation, because the next phase will not be measured by calm conversations or polite restraint, but by what happens when truth demands a price. And the question presses forward with uncomfortable force: what does Gino do when honesty costs him something real? Trust behaves like currency in this story, spent in moments people underestimate and never refunded once the account hits zero, and this difference separates Natalie and Gino from the other couples viewers watch unravel in louder, messier ways. Some relationships break in a single explosion and never pretend otherwise, while this one fractured slowly, through promises made with confidence and corrected later by contact, and slow fractures leave scars that do not announce themselves. Irreversible damage lives in the past here. The party, the silence, the overlapping stories, and those moments do not disappear because time passes or tone improves. They stay active in memory, shaping every new interaction that follows. What exists now is conditional hope, not renewal, and conditional hope demands observation rather than repair. Natalie does not position herself as healer, fixer, or emotional safety net, and that distinction matters because healing implies responsibility for someone else's growth, while observation keeps responsibility where it belongs. She watches consistency, not charm, response under pressure, not rehearsed calm, and this approach changes the feel of the story entirely. Other couples argue to prove devotion or pain, yet Natalie steps back and lets behavior speak, and behavior speaks slower, clearer, and harder to manipulate. Gino feels this shift because currency once spent forces restraint, and restraint reveals habits people never needed to examine before. Each interaction becomes a data point rather than a promise, and data accumulates whether anyone likes the result or not. Natalie does not interrupt patterns. She allows them to complete, and completion exposes direction. This is why the story feels quieter yet heavier, because quiet tests last longer and cut deeper. The realization settles gradually, not as drama, but as understanding, because trust here does not reset after a conversation or a good weekend, it stays under review. Natalie continues observing, Gino continues adjusting, and the test does not end when cameras stop rolling or when tension dips for a moment, because the evaluation remains active, ongoing, and unresolved. The payoff arrives quietly, without fireworks or dramatic confessions, because this was never building toward a fairy tale reset, and anyone expecting a grand reconciliation misses the point of what Natalie has been doing from the start. The relationship is not restored, it is paused, and there is a difference, because pause implies space for evaluation, while restoration implies belief, and belief has not returned. The door stands open enough to allow conversation, but the chain stays on, visible, deliberate, and unmoved. Gino does not receive a verdict of guilt or innocence, and he does not earn a redemption arc either, because redemption requires proof over time, not polite exchanges in controlled environments. Power remains with Natalie, not through dominance or cruelty, but through choice, because she controls access now, she controls pace, and she decides when or if the next step exists. That shift alone changes everything, because earlier chapters showed her reacting to chaos, and this chapter shows her setting conditions. Gino may speak about growth, he may practice restraint, he may avoid old triggers, but none of that overrides the reality that trust was spent and now must be earned slowly, without shortcuts. The story ends not with certainty, but with accountability hovering in the background, waiting for its next step. This kind of ending feels less satisfying to viewers who crave closure, yet it rings truer, because real life rarely hands out clean resolutions on schedule. Natalie is not closing the door fully, and she is not swinging it wide either. She stands between past damage and future possibility, guarding both. And as this quiet standoff settles, another story somewhere else is building louder cracks, faster collapses, and harsher consequences, proving once again that